A black Supreme Court justice, calm and dignified, pulled over by a cop dripping with disdain. "You expect me to believe a justice lives here?" He scoffs, accusing him of impersonating an official. The air crackles with tension. Then, the truth hits like a thunderbolt, and the dashcam footage leaks, igniting a national firestorm of outrage and calls for accountability. This isn't just a traffic stop. It's a raw look at prejudice confronting power. What happens when the system confronts itself? You need to see this. The late October air, crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, usually filled Malcolm Wright with a profound sense of peace whenever he returned to Willow Creek, Pennsylvania. It was a Rockwellian town, or so it liked to believe, with its colonial-era Main Street, white-steepled churches, and the quiet dignity of old maples lining its residential roads. Tonight, however, as his leased black sedan glided down Elm Street, a familiar knot tightened in his stomach, a premonition he'd learned to heed over 58 years of living in his skin. It was the kind of unease that whispered, "Not here, not now." Then, the strobing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror, a violent, unwelcome bloom in the tranquil darkness. Malcolm pulled over, his hands already moving with practiced calm. Engine off. Interior light on. Hands on the wheel. He was Supreme Court Justice Malcolm Wright, a man whose words could shape the nation, yet in this moment, he was just another black man pulled over on a dark road. The irony was a bitter pill he'd swallowed too many times to count. A uniformed officer, young, broad-shouldered, with a haircut tight enough to look aggressive, approached the driver's side. His name tag read J. Harper. His flashlight beam cut a sharp swathe across Malcolm's face, lingering a moment too long. "License and registration. Now." Officer Jake Harper's voice was flat, edged with an impatience that bordered on contempt. There was no "sir," no "please," no pretense of courtesy. Malcolm, his expression carefully neutral, reached slowly for his wallet and the glove compartment. He handed over his driver's license, bearing his Willow Creek address, and the car's rental agreement. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Harper barely glanced at the documents. His eyes, narrowed and suspicious, flicked from Malcolm's face to the well-appointed interior of the sedan. "You're a long way from D.C., aren't you?" "A beat. Unless you expect me to believe a justice lives here?" He snorted, a small, ugly sound. In this neighborhood, Elm Street wasn't the most affluent part of Willow Creek, but it was where Malcolm's modest childhood home still stood, the home his grandmother had kept, the home he returned to whenever the relentless pressures of Washington became too much. It was his sanctuary. "This is my hometown, officer," Malcolm said, his voice even, betraying none of the simmering indignation. "And that is my valid driver's license. I was attending a legal conference at the State University and am heading home." Harper's lip curled. "Right? A legal conference." He tapped the driver's license against his palm. "You know, impersonating a federal official is a serious crime." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. "We get all sorts trying to pull a fast one. Think a fancy title will get them out of a ticket. Or worse." Malcolm felt a cold dread seep into him. This was escalating beyond a routine, if biased, stop. "Officer, I assure you, I am who the license says I am. If you'd like to verify it." "Oh, I'll verify, all right." Harper straightened, his hand drifting towards his radio. "Stay in the car. Don't move." He stepped back, his gaze still fixed on Malcolm, and spoke into his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I've got a possible 10 to 56 suspect claiming to be a high-level government official. Requesting backup. Elm Street, near Oakwood. A 10 to 56. Impersonating an officer." The accusation hung in the chilled air, ludicrous and terrifying. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment, drawing on decades of cultivated patience. He was a Supreme Court justice. He had argued landmark cases. He had faced down senators and presidents. And here he was on a quiet street in his own hometown, about to be arrested for being himself. The wait for backup felt like an eternity, punctuated by Harper's periodic, hostile stares. Malcolm thought of his grandmother, of the sacrifices made, of the immense, improbable journey that had led him to the nation's highest court. And for what? To be reduced to a suspect by a cop who saw not a man, but a stereotype. Finally, another cruiser arrived, its lights adding to the disorienting assault on the quiet street. A second officer, older, more weathered, conferred with Harper. Malcolm could hear snippets. "Claims he's a Supreme Court justice. No way. Driving a rental, he knew he had to de-escalate, but how, when the very core of his identity was being dismissed as a fabrication? He remembered his law clerk, Priya Desai. She was staying at a nearby hotel, having driven separately from the conference. He'd given her a spare key to his house earlier. Taking a measured breath, Malcolm spoke, his voice calm but firm. Officer Harper, my law clerk, Ms. Priya Desai, is in Willow Creek. She has my official credentials and can verify my identity. She can be here in minutes. Harper exchanged a look with the second officer, a smirk playing on his lips. Oh, you have a law clerk too? This gets better and better. But the older officer, perhaps sensing the potential for a monumental screw-up, nodded curtly. All right, make the call. But no sudden moves. With painstaking slowness, Malcolm retrieved his phone. Priya answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with concern when she heard his. He explained the situation concisely, the absurdity of it catching in his own throat. Bring my judicial ID, Priya. And please, hurry. 10 agonizing minutes later, Priya's compact SUV pulled up behind the second police car. A petite woman with intelligent, concerned eyes, Priya Desai radiated a quiet competence that even Harper seemed to register. She approached, holding a leather-bound folder. Officers, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I am Priya Desai, law clerk to Justice Malcolm Wright. Here are his official credentials. She opened the folder, revealing the gold-embossed identification card with its unmistakable seal. Harper took the ID, his bravado visibly faltering as he examined it under his flashlight. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, stunned pallor. He looked from the ID to Malcolm, then back to the ID. The older officer peered over his shoulder, his eyes widening. Justice, right? Harper stammered, the name suddenly tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Malcolm, truly looked at him, for the first time, and saw not a suspect, but a man of immense authority. A man whose face he'd undoubtedly seen on television, but had failed to recognize through the lens of his own prejudice. The older officer swore under his breath. Jake, what in God's name have you done? The silence that followed was thick with unspoken recriminations. Harper handed the credentials back to Priya, his hand trembling slightly. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, but it was lost in the sudden, overwhelming weight of his blunder. As Priya got into Malcolm's car to drive him the remaining few blocks home, her expression a mixture of fury and relief, Malcolm glanced at Harper. The officer was still standing by his cruiser, looking small and deflated under the streetlights. But Malcolm felt no triumph, only a profound weariness. The system he had dedicated his life to upholding had, once again, shown its ugliest side. He didn't know it yet, but the dashcam footage from Officer Harper's cruiser, recording every word, every sneer, every moment of his humiliation, was already on its way to a local news outlet, leaked by an anonymous source within the Willow Creek Police Department. Within hours, the quiet traffic stop on Elm Street would explode into a national firestorm. Detroit, 1985. The summer air in their small apartment was thick and stagnant, the kind that clung to your skin like a second layer. Malcolm, then a skinny 15-year-old with knobby knees and oversized glasses, squinted at the dog-eared pages of To Kill a Mockingbird by the flickering light of a single tallow candle. Blackouts were frequent in their neighborhood, a casual cruelty of infrastructure neglect that they'd learned to endure. His grandmother, Elena, hummed softly in her rocking chair, the rhythmic creak of familiar comfort in the suffocating darkness. Read that part again, child, she'd say, her voice raspy with age and wisdom. The part where Atticus talks about courage. Courage. It was a word Malcolm was still trying to understand. His own father, a good man, a proud man, was then 5 years into a 20-year sentence for an armed robbery he didn't commit. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin color. The evidence was flimsy, the defense lackluster, the outcome preordained. That was Malcolm's first brutal lesson in the malleability of justice. His father's wrongful imprisonment had become the silent, gaping wound in their family, a constant reminder of the system's fallibility, its capacity for devastating error. Elena, widowed young and now effectively widowed again by the carceral state, had taken Malcolm in, raising him on social security checks, fierce love, and an unshakable belief in the power of education. The law, Malcolm, she'd tell him, her eyes reflecting the candlelight, it's like a strong river. It can carve paths through mountains, or it can flood and destroy everything in its way. You gotta learn its currents. His grandmother's wisdom was echoed and amplified by Mrs. Rosa Nguyen, his 10th grade civics teacher at Marcus Garvey High. Mrs. Nguyen was a wisp of a woman, a Vietnamese immigrant who had fled Saigon with her family on a crowded boat, carrying little more than her memories and an iron will. She saw the spark in young Malcolm, the quiet intensity, the hunger for something more than the predetermined path many of his peers seemed destined for. One afternoon, after Malcolm had passionately, if somewhat clumsily, argued about the due process failures in a hypothetical case study, Mrs. Nguyen kept him after class. The classroom was empty, smelling of chalk dust and floor wax. Sunshine streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny, captured stars. "Malcolm," she said, her accent a melodious counterpoint to the harsh Detroit vernacular he was used to. "You have a fire in you. But fire needs direction or it consumes itself." She tapped a finger on the worn copy of the Constitution on her desk. "This book, these laws, they are not immutable stone. They are strong, yes, but also flexible. The law bends, Malcolm, for those who know how to shape it. And it breaks for those who don't understand its power or for whom it is wielded as a weapon." Her words became his mantra. The law bends for those who know how to shape it. He devoured books on history, philosophy, and jurisprudence, his grandmother's meager funds stretched to their limit at second-hand bookstores. He excelled in school, driven by a relentless need to understand the intricate machinery of the system that had stolen his father. Harvard Law School was another world entirely. The hallowed halls, the centuries of tradition, the palpable aura of privilege, it was both exhilarating and alienating. He was one of a handful of black students in his year, and the whispers were unavoidable: affirmative action hire, diversity pick. He heard them in the subtle condescension of a professor's question, in the forced politeness of a study group invitation, in the way some classmates' eyes would skate past him as if he were an inconsequential shadow. He responded not with anger, but with an almost monastic dedication to his studies. He'd spend hours in the cavernous law library, the weight of history pressing down on him, the words of his grandmother and Mrs. Nguyen echoing in his mind. He wasn't just studying for himself, he was studying for his father, for all the voiceless, the marginalized, the forgotten. His father's appeals had all failed, each one a fresh stab of pain, a renewed sense of helplessness that Malcolm channeled into a fierce determination. After graduation, he eschewed the lucrative offers from corporate law firms. Instead, he returned to Detroit and joined the public defender's office, a decision that baffled many of his classmates but felt like the only authentic path. The pay was abysmal, the caseloads crushing, the resources virtually non-existent. But here, in the grimy courtrooms and overcrowded jails, he found his purpose. He was on the front lines, fighting for those the system was all too ready to discard. Years blurred into a relentless cycle of arraignments, plea bargains, and trials. He saw the casual cruelties, the systemic biases, the way poverty and race so often predetermined guilt. He won some, lost more, but never lost the fire Mrs. Nguyen had seen in him. Then came the case of Darius Washington. Darius was 17, a bright kid from the same kind of neighborhood Malcolm had grown up in, accused of armed robbery and assault on a police officer. The evidence supplied by two veteran cops seemed damning. But something felt off to Malcolm. Darius was terrified but insisted on his innocence with a clarity that resonated. Malcolm dug. He spent weeks poring over police reports, witness statements, crime scene photos. He interviewed reluctant neighbors, pieced together timelines, found inconsistencies so subtle they'd been easily overlooked. The cops claimed Darius had fled a routine stop, fired a weapon, and was apprehended after a struggle. But Malcolm discovered a pattern with these two officers, a string of arrests in that neighborhood with suspiciously similar narratives, arrests that often involved resisting or assault charges being added after the fact. He found an old security camera from a nearby bodega, its grainy footage largely ignored by the initial investigators. It showed Darius being aggressively confronted by the officers before any alleged flight, and it showed no weapon in Darius's hand. The trial was a David and Goliath battle. Malcolm, armed with his meticulous research and the grainy video, systematically dismantled the officers' testimony. He exposed their lies, their history of complaints, their racial bias. When the jury returned with a not guilty verdict, the courtroom erupted. Darius wept in his mother's arms. Malcolm felt a profound, weary satisfaction. He had not just freed an innocent young man. He had held a mirror up to a flawed system. The Darius Washington exoneration became a local sensation, then a national story. It highlighted the pervasive issue of police misconduct and the critical role of diligent public defense. It also, unexpectedly, propelled Malcolm right into the spotlight. He was invited to speak at conferences, to write op-eds, to serve on judicial reform committees. His sharp intellect, his unwavering commitment to justice, and his quiet eloquence caught the attention of those in power. A state judgeship followed, then a federal appointment to the Court of Appeals. Each step was a testament to his diligence, his integrity, his profound understanding of the law not just as an abstract set of rules, but as a powerful force that shaped human lives. When a vacancy opened on the Supreme Court, his name, once whispered as an affirmative action hire, was now spoken with respect and admiration. The confirmation hearings were grueling, a political circus that picked apart every aspect of his life and jurisprudence. But he navigated it with the same calm dignity he had shown Officer Harper on Elm Street. He thought of his father, who had died in prison 2 years before Malcolm's nomination, never seeing his son vindicated, never tasting freedom himself. He thought of his grandmother's unwavering faith, of Mrs. Nguyen's prescient words. When he finally took his seat on the High Court, the youngest justice in decades, he carried with him the weight of his past, the lessons of Detroit, the memory of candlelight, and his grandmother's voice. He was a guardian of the Constitution, but he never forgot that the law, for all its majesty, could be a treacherous current. He never forgot that its power to bend depended entirely on who was doing the shaping. And he never, ever forgot what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a flashlight beam, judged not by the content of his character, but by the color of his skin. The dashcam footage was wildfire. It spread across social media platforms with astonishing speed, each share, each horrified comment, each angry emoji fanning the flames. By dawn, #Justice for Wright was trending globally. The irony was not lost on Malcolm. He, a Supreme Court justice, now the subject of a hashtag demanding the very thing he was sworn to uphold. From his temporary refuge in a DC hotel, Willow Creek felt too raw, too exposed for the moment. Malcolm watched the digital storm unfold with a familiar sense of dread and a new, personal ache. The incident itself was a humiliation he'd replayed 100 times in his mind, but seeing it through the world's eyes, the stark display of Officer Harper's contempt, the casual stripping of his dignity, was profoundly unsettling. Priya, ever loyal, fielded calls from concerned colleagues, from outraged civil rights leaders, from the Chief Justice himself offering unwavering support. Back in Willow Creek, the town was reeling. Protests, small at first, then growing with an organic, unstoppable momentum, began to gather outside the police station and city hall. They were led by Keisha Monroe, a 19-year-old community college student whose fiery passion belied her youth. Keisha's older brother, Jamal, had been killed 2 years prior during a no-knock raid gone tragically wrong. The officers involved were cleared of wrongdoing, a familiar, bitter outcome that had ignited Keisha's activism. For her, Malcolm Wright's ordeal wasn't just an insult to a high-ranking official. It was another verse in the same sorrowful song her family knew by heart. This ain't just about a Supreme Court justice. Keisha's voice, amplified by a crackling megaphone, rang out across the town square, her face a mask of righteous fury. This is about every black man, every brown woman, every person of color who's ever been treated like they're less than human by the people sworn to protect them. If they can do this to Justice Wright, what chance do the rest of us have? The crowd roared its agreement, a chorus of shared pain and frustration. The fallout was also intensely personal for Officer Jake Harper. He'd been placed on administrative leave, a standard procedure that felt anything but standard. The notoriety was suffocating. His name, his face were everywhere, synonymous with racist policing. But the sharpest blow came from within his own home. His 17-year-old daughter, Emily, a bright, thoughtful girl with a keen sense of justice, confronted him in their cramped living room, the television blaring another segment about the incident. Her eyes, usually so full of affection for him, were now cold with accusation. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling, "that man you pulled over. Justice Wright, do you even know who he really is to us?" Harper, slumped on the sofa, nursing a beer and a monumental sense of self-pity, just grunted. "Some big-shot judge, apparently, made a mistake, all right? Everyone's crucifying me." Emily's face hardened. "A mistake? You humiliated him. You accused him of impersonating an official. You sounded hateful." She took a deep breath. 6 years ago, Mom's community health clinic, the one that serves all those low-income families downtown, it was about to close. Funding cuts, bureaucratic nonsense. They were desperate. Harper looked at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He remembered his wife, Sarah, coming home exhausted and defeated for months, worried sick about her patients losing their only source of affordable health care. A pro bono legal team stepped in, Emily continued, her voice thick with emotion. They fought for that clinic, navigated all the red tape, found new funding sources. They saved it, Dad. And the lawyer who led that team, the one who worked tirelessly, who Mom said was a godsend. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. That was Malcolm Wright. Before he was a Supreme Court justice. He was just a lawyer then, helping people. Helping our community. Helping Mom. The beer slipped from Harper's suddenly nerveless fingers, thudding onto the carpet, foam seeping into the worn fibers. Sarah's clinic. He'd known she'd had legal help, but he'd never bothered with the details. Never asked the name of the lawyer who had saved her job, her passion. The man he had treated with such casual disdain, such baseless suspicion, was the same man who had, indirectly, secured his own family's well-being. The irony was a crushing weight, far heavier than the public condemnation. He had profiled and belittled a man who was, in a quiet, uncelebrated way, a hero to his own wife. Meanwhile, the story had caught the attention of Carlos Ruiz, a tenacious investigative journalist for a national news organization. Ruiz had a reputation for unearthing uncomfortable truths, particularly within law enforcement. He started digging into Officer Jake Harper's record, and what he found was damning. It wasn't just one mistake. Over his 8-year career, Harper had accumulated 22 misconduct complaints. 22. The majority were for excessive force and racially biased policing, primarily against Black and Latino drivers. All of them had been investigated internally. All of them had been dismissed, buried, deemed unsubstantiated by Willow Creek Police Chief Linda Carter. Chief Carter, a woman who had built her career on a tough-on-crime image, initially defended Harper, calling the traffic stop an unfortunate misunderstanding. But as Ruiz's investigation, published in a series of explosive articles, laid bare the pattern of Harper's behavior and Carter's complicity in covering it up, her position became untenable. The calls for her resignation grew deafening, not just from protesters, but from city council members and state legislators. Back in D.C., Malcolm watched these developments with a grim sense of validation. His humiliation was not an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a deeper, systemic rot. The anger he felt was cold now and focused. He met with his most trusted clerks, with legal scholars, with civil rights advocates. The conversations were long, intense, and urgent. This moment, however painful, was also an opportunity. An opportunity for meaningful change. He began to draft, not a judicial opinion, but the framework for federal legislation. Legislation that would mandate stricter federal oversight of local police departments, create a national database for officer misconduct, and tie federal funding to the implementation of comprehensive bias training and de-escalation programs. He knew it would be an uphill battle, a political minefield. But Mrs. Nguyen's words echoed. The law bends for those who know how to shape it. He was a shaper now, in a way he had never anticipated. The gavel he wielded in the Supreme Court, a symbol of authority, felt different in his hands now. It wasn't just an instrument for interpreting laws, it was a reminder of the responsibility to ensure those laws were just and justly applied. It represented authority earned through struggle, his own and that of countless others who had fought for their rights, for their dignity. The unraveling in Willow Creek was painful, but it was also a crucible, forging a new resolve in Malcolm Wright, a resolve to use his power, his platform, his pain, to demand something better. The U.S. Senate chamber was an imposing arena, all marble and mahogany, steeped in the gravity of history. Yet, as Malcolm Wright sat at the witness table, the vastness of the room seemed to shrink, focusing to a pinpoint on the faces before him, the Judiciary Committee, a phalanx of senators whose questions could either illuminate or obfuscate the truth. To his right sat Keisha Monroe, her youthful face set with a determination that belied her 19 years. To his left was Carlos Ruiz, his journalist's notepad resting beside a folder thick with his investigative findings. An unlikely trio united by a common cause. Malcolm began his testimony, his voice calm, measured, yet resonating with an undeniable moral authority. He recounted the traffic stop on Elm Street, not with bitterness, but with a stark, factual clarity that made the injustice all the more palpable. He spoke of the creeping dread, the casual dismissal, the accusation of impersonation, the humiliation of being rendered invisible, his identity erased by prejudice. This was not merely an encounter between one citizen and one police officer, Malcolm stated, his gaze sweeping across the senators. It was a reflection of a deeper, more pervasive issue that casts a long shadow over the promise of equal justice under law. If I, a justice of the Supreme Court, can be subjected to such treatment, what hope is there for the ordinary citizen, the young man or woman of color who does not have a title or a platform to shield them? Then came the moment that silenced the room. Malcolm nodded to an aide and Officer Harper's dashcam audio filled the chamber. Harper's voice, dripping with disdain, license and registration. Now. His snort, "You expect me to believe a justice lives here?" And then the line that hung in the air like a toxic cloud, spoken as Malcolm tried to explain the situation. "You people always cry racism." A collective intake of breath rippled through the gallery. Some senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, their expressions grim. The raw, unvarnished prejudice in Harper's tone was undeniable, stripped bare for all to hear. Keisha Monroe spoke next, her voice trembling initially, then strengthening with conviction. She told the story of her brother, Jamal, his life extinguished too soon, his memory a driving force for her activism. Justice Wright's experience is not an anomaly, she declared, her eyes locking with those of the senators. It's the lived reality for so many in our communities. We are tired of being "you people." We are tired of our pain being dismissed. We demand accountability. We demand change. Carlos Ruiz then presented his findings, the 22 prior complaints against Harper, the evidence of Chief Carter's systematic cover-ups. He painted a picture of a police department where misconduct festered, protected by a culture of silence and impunity. The questioning from the senators was, predictably, divided. Some were supportive, expressing outrage and a commitment to reform. Others were skeptical, defensive, raising concerns about federal overreach and the dangers of undermining law enforcement. It was Senator Eleanor Park, a Korean-American legislator known for her sharp intellect and progressive stance, who delivered one of the most powerful challenges. Facing down a colleague who was extolling the virtues of law and order and minimizing the Willow Creek incident, Senator Park's voice was icy. "Senator," she began, "is this the law and order you protect? An order where a Supreme Court justice is treated like a common criminal based on the color of his skin? An order where an officer with nearly 24 misconduct complaints remains on the force, shielded by his superiors? Is it orderly for communities to live in fear of those sworn to protect them? Or is it, perhaps, that the order you speak of is one that privileges some and oppresses others, an order that prioritizes the comfort of the powerful over the rights of the marginalized?" Her words cut through the chamber's usual decorum, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Meanwhile, in a cramped, sparsely furnished apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Jake Harper watched the hearing on a flickering television screen. He was no longer Officer Harper. He'd been stripped of his badge and fired from the Willow Creek Police Department shortly after Ruiz's articles confirmed the extent of his record, and Chief Carter, in a desperate bid to save her own career, a bid that would ultimately fail, had thrown him under the bus. He saw his own downfall play out in real time, his sneering voice echoing in the Senate chamber, the condemnation in the eyes of the nation. But the public shame was a dull ache compared to the sharp, persistent pain of his daughter Emily's silence. She hadn't spoken more than a few monosyllabic words to him since her devastating revelation about Malcolm Wright and her mother's clinic. She looked at him now with a mixture of disappointment and a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical blow. His wife, Sarah, was civil but distant, the warmth in their marriage chilled by his actions and the subsequent revelations. He had not just lost his job, he had fractured his family, perhaps irreparably. He saw Malcolm Wright on the screen, not as an accuser, but as a man of quiet dignity, speaking truth to power. He heard Keisha Monroe's passionate plea, her grief a raw, undeniable force. He saw the evidence of his own repeated failings laid bare by Carlos Ruiz. There was no defense left, no excuse. There was only the stark, uncomfortable reality of his own prejudice and the devastating consequences it had wrought. The hearing concluded late in the afternoon. No laws were passed that day, no immediate victories declared. But something had shifted. The conversation had been elevated, the issue brought to the forefront of the national consciousness with an undeniable urgency. Malcolm Wright, Keisha Monroe, and Carlos Ruiz left the Senate chamber not as victors but as catalysts. They had planted seeds of change in stony ground, armed with truth and a shared hope for a more just future. For Malcolm, the day was exhausting but necessary. He had used his voice, his platform, not for personal vengeance, but for systemic reform. As he left the Capitol, the setting sun casting long shadows across the mall, he knew this was just one battle in a long, arduous war. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something akin to hope. The path was clearer now, the work defined. The gavel he wielded had found a new resonance, not just in the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court, but in the broader courtroom of public opinion, where the fight for true justice was waged every single day. 1 year later, the autumn leaves in Willow Creek were once again turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold, blanketing Elm Street in a vibrant carpet. The town still bore the quiet scars of the previous year's turmoil, but there was also a palpable sense of nascent change, a fragile hope blooming in the aftermath of the storm. At Willow Creek High School, a crowd had gathered in the newly renovated auditorium. Students, teachers, community members, and local dignitaries buzzed with anticipation. On the stage, Malcolm Wright stood before a podium, a gentle smile on his face. Today marked the official inauguration of the Mrs. Rosa and Gwyn Youth Legal Clinic, a project he had championed and funded, a beacon of hope and empowerment for the town's young people. Mrs. Nguyen taught me that the law bends for those who know how to shape it, Malcolm said, his voice resonating with warmth and conviction. This clinic, named in her honor, is dedicated to that principle. It will be a place where young minds can learn about their rights, where they can find advocacy, and where they can begin to understand the power they hold to shape a more just future for themselves and their community. From a shadowy corner at the back of the auditorium, Jake Harper watched unseen. He was no longer Officer Harper, the brash cop with a chip on his shoulder. He was just Jake, a janitor at the high school, a job he'd taken out of necessity, a humbling reminder of his fall from grace. His days were spent sweeping floors, emptying trash cans, scrubbing away the daily grime. It was honest work, anonymous work. He rarely made eye contact with anyone, the shame still a heavy cloak around his shoulders. Emily was talking to him again, slowly, tentatively. There were no easy reconciliations, but the door, once firmly shut, was now ajar. Sarah remained his wife, their relationship a work in progress, scarred but not entirely broken. He listened to Justice Wright speak. The words devoid of any lingering animosity, filled instead with a profound sense of purpose. He saw the eager faces of the students, the hope in their eyes. A strange mixture of regret and something unnameable stirred within him. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled and refreshments were served, Keisha Monroe, now a confident sophomore and a lead volunteer at the new clinic, spotted Harper near the exit. He tensed, expecting a glare, a cutting remark, the familiar sting of condemnation. Instead, she approached him quietly, a flyer in her hand. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice even devoid of malice. She held out the flyer. It read, "Community Bias and Reconciliation Training. Tonight, 7 p.m. Willow Creek Community Center. All welcome." Harper stared at the flyer, then at Keisha's outstretched hand. He saw no judgment in her eyes, only a straightforward invitation. He hesitated, the old defensiveness warring with a new, unfamiliar urge. Slowly, reluctantly, he took the flyer. "Thanks," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Keisha simply nodded and walked away, rejoining a group of students animatedly discussing their plans for the clinic. Harper looked at the flyer again. Bias training. Maybe it was a start. Later that afternoon, Malcolm found himself in the small office allocated to the clinic within the high school. A young man, a high school junior named Marcus, sat across from him, his brow furrowed in concentration. Between them on the small desk lay Malcolm's grandmother's old, weathered copy of the Constitution. Its pages were soft from years of handling, its margins filled with Elena's faint pencil annotations and, later, his own. "So, the Fourth Amendment," Marcus said, pointing to the text. "It says we have a right against unreasonable searches and seizures. But what makes a search unreasonable? Who decides?" Malcolm leaned forward, the weight of his own journey from that candlelit Detroit apartment to the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court settling upon him. He looked at Marcus, saw the same spark of inquiry he once felt, the same nascent understanding that the law was not just words on a page, but a living, breathing thing. "That, Marcus," Malcolm began, "is one of the most important questions. The words provide a framework, a promise. But unreasonable, that's where the interpretation comes in. It's debated in courtrooms, classrooms, on street corners. It's shaped by precedent, by societal values, and sometimes, unfortunately, by prejudice." He tapped the well-worn book. "This document is a powerful tool. It was written by men of their time with their own biases and blind spots, but it also contains the seeds of its own evolution. It has been stretched, challenged, and reshaped by generations of people, often those on the margins, who demanded that its promises apply equally to everyone. As he spoke, his gaze drifted to the window. Across the schoolyard, on the wide brick wall of the gymnasium, a vibrant mural was nearing completion. It was Keisha Monroe's design, a community project she had spearheaded. Bold figures, black, white, brown, young, old, worked together, some holding shattered pieces of a mirror, others meticulously fitting them back together to form a new, more inclusive reflection of their town. Beneath it, in flowing script, were the words, "The law is a mirror, shatter it, rebuild it fair." The mural pulsed with color and energy, a testament to collective action, to the belief that even broken things could be remade, stronger and more beautiful. A profound understanding, clear and resonant, settled over Malcolm. It wasn't in the august chamber of the Supreme Court, surrounded by symbols of power, that he felt the true essence of justice. It was here, in this small office, with this eager young man, with the legacy of his grandmother and Mrs. Nguyen surrounding him, with the sight of Keisha's mural testifying to the enduring power of community. In the quiet hum of the school, far from the pronouncements of any formal courtroom, Malcolm finally understood. The law's power lay not in its words, but in the hands that chose to wield them justly. That was intense, right? If Justice Wright's powerful journey from a wrongly accused man's son to a nation-shaping voice resonated with you and sparked a desire for true equality, don't let this story fade. Help us amplify these vital conversations. Smash that like button, share this video far and wide, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories that challenge and inspire. Your engagement truly matters.